Okay, so we're now recording. Um, Today is Genesis 37. Um, I recently dumped a bunch of money on Logos Bible software. Um, and so I've been learning how to use that today, and it's got a lot of different really cool tools.
Hold on, are you adding textbooks to the curriculum?
No, I am not.
Okay, so
I'm just all
we don't have to buy something.
No, what the thing I was going to say, the thing I was leading up to this is that I was able to read a lot more and better quality commentaries for this. And so I'm hoping that this will like kind of improve things going forward, because I was mostly using that, like the one that I was using, I was just using like the top 3 commentaries I found on like Google, and they all kind of sucked. And that's why I was constantly just like,
You're just stuck with enduring word.
yeah, I was like, these are awful. But these ones have been pretty cool. And there's a lot of kind of interesting things. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time before we start reading, just talking about thematically what this next section is, because the remaining chapters all the way to chapter 50 are mostly about Joseph, except for like 2 portions. That's the next chapter. We have this really weird story about Judah and Tamar, and then there's a section about Jacob's blessings for his kids and his grandkids, but it's pretty much all about Joseph. And you can see this section in the story of Joseph. I kind of mentioned it before, last week, but you can kind of see it as both the concluding narrative to all of Genesis, but it's also kind of the prequel narrative to Exodus. But thematically, it is the conclusion to Genesis. And the most kind of important line is the line that shows up in Genesis 50, which is where Joseph says, "You meant this for evil, but God meant it for good." And that is kind of the capstone thematic statement on the entirety of Genesis itself, actually, because the whole story of Genesis, right, is creation, Eden, things are great, crap, things went bad because of humans, things continually get bad, things continually get bad. God's having to step in and do some stuff. Even when God steps in and does some stuff, humans still manage to screw it up. And then God is now in this wrestling with humanity to try and get humanity to do the right thing. Humanity is wrestling back with God, trying to figure things out. This back and forth thing. Things are continuously getting both better in some ways and then worse in other ways. But it's ultimately going to conclude with this statement of, even the bad things that you guys do, God utilizes them for good, which is a really, really strong statement of God's providence, and is the thing that all of Genesis has been like building up to, is kind of getting people to understand that idea, because it's very easy to have this idea of humans mess things up, God needs to come in and fix it, or humans mess things up, but God will figure out a way. So, it's like, okay, you crash my car, but I'll figure out a way to fix my car. But that statement is even more powerful of, no, I'm actually going to use the evil that you did. And actually, the evil that you did is the tool by which I'm going to bring about good. That's an even stronger statement than like those previous ones, right? And obviously, this gets its ultimate fulfillment in Christ, where he uses, like, it's the sin and the corruptness of the people that kills Jesus, but he uses that to bring about their salvation. And the same way in the story that we're going to read today, their sin that they commit on Joseph is actually the thing that God is going to use to save them. Does that mean that it's okay? No, it doesn't. Okay, like it doesn't. But the story is about coming to that understanding that even the sin that you do, God can use that ultimately to save you. And it's kind of a radical idea, and it's weird, and it helps frame things properly where you lower yourself and you raise up God. Okay. So I wanted to get that out of the way before we really start getting to it. So, okay, here we go. 37.
Chapter 37. Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph being 17 years.
Okay, I actually wanted to pause it right there. So that these are the generations of Jacob. You're going to get some usually whenever we see a statement like that, like these are the generations of so and so, it's followed by a genealogy, right? Or a genealogy just like preceded it. We didn't have that here. Instead, this seems to be referring to something else. And I think it's just, I would think that it's just the final like section of the whole book, as just like these are because you can also read that these are the generations of Jacob as like these are the descendants of Jacob. And so it's like these are the stories about the descendants of Jacob. And it's all going to get wrapped up in this last section. Most of it is about Joseph, but there's like one story in there about Judah, and some of the other brothers show up from time to time.
Mine says this is the account of Jacob and his family.
And so that same word, generations and descendants, also sometimes means account. And so people like you, it can be used all three of those ways.
Old was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved.
Okay, so the first little section there. So, okay, there's a lot of kind of like speculation and debate about how does this fall in the timeline? Because remember, we've already had Rachel die, right? Giving birth to Benjamin. But we're going to see kind of a line that seem in later in this chapter, and actually much later, there's some other lines that suggest that this might be going on while Rachel is still alive. So he might have gotten actually sent away before Benjamin was born. But there's also some other stuff that is potentially confusing because Joseph seems to be aware of who Benjamin is, but
doesn't he ask for him later?
he asks for Ben, but the way he words it is he asks for your younger brother, but they also tell him that he has a younger brother. So it's weird because he's in this mode of kind of like tricking them. So you don't really know like what does Joseph know and like what doesn't he know. So it's hard to kind of figure out when exactly did Rachel die and what's the age difference between Joseph and Benjamin. But anyways, we have how old Joseph is. And also this line of he was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. We don't get any more information about what that is. The first time I read it, I thought that maybe it was like a quick commentary about what the story that's about to be told is about, and that it just has something to do with the dreams. But it seems to have nothing to do with that because it's not really. He tells it to his brothers. He doesn't tell that really to like, and it's not a bad report about so it seems to be a bad report specifically about the sons of the concubines.
The Bible just wants us to know that Joseph's a snitch.
Yeah, he like a little bit of a snitch. And also it's funny because there doesn't really seem to be too many like quote unquote bad things that Joseph does. In a lot of ways, Joseph is unlike his fathers before him. Joseph is kind of a really good guy. This seemed that maybe he's snitching here. Maybe it was legit. Maybe he should have shut his mouth up about the dreams. Like like the most that you can really critique of Joseph is like maybe he should have done things slightly different. But by and large, he seems pretty like
I always took it
okay.
as a kid that he was just like he didn't know when to draw the line at.
He
like,
didn't have
talking.
tact.
He
Yeah.
didn't know how to shut up about what God is doing. He just
And that may be the case. And this may
Cast his pearls before swine.
I mean possibly, yeah, that's
how I
another
always
reference that comes
seen
up.
it as a kid.
But also I think that this is also partly why you may see a little bit more of a rift between him and the sons of the concubines versus him and the sons of Leah. Because remember, if Benjamin hasn't been born at this time, he's the only son of Rachel at this moment. And it's kind of a couple of the sons of Leah that sort of stick up for him a little bit. So there might be something going on there as well. And maybe this was like kind of put in there to show why those sons in particular stood up for him, whereas the other ones didn't. Okay.
Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him.
Okay. This part also gets me. It says that the reason why he loved him is because he was the son of his old age. And I'm like, well, they're kind of all the sons of his old age, right? Because apparently, according to like some reckoning, he started having them around age 70. They're kind of all the sons of his old age. And also, this is sort of indicative to me that maybe Benjamin is not on the scene, because if he was, wouldn't Benjamin be the baby? So it seems like it's not. Also, the robe of many colors, like 3 or 4 different commentaries all make the point that this robe is probably also supposed to somewhat signify some kind of level of like authority. And the thought was that and I think that this tracks a little bit, that the many colors might have to do actually with the length of the robe more so than the actual visual appearance of the robe. Because if it's a longer robe, it's not a workman's robe. It's like an aristocrat's robe. An aristocrat would be someone that watches everybody else do work, which also kind of explains why later on it's all of his brothers that are doing work and he's not, and he's just told to go out and like look at them. But also that contradicts with the Joseph was 17 years old and was pasturing the flock with his brothers. So I'm not too sure how I feel about that idea, but part of the reason why I do like it is because it was very common in the ancient world. People would phrase it, and this happens in like the New Testament, where people say, like so and so was a seller of purple, and they talk about colors as like quantities, and what they're talking about is the color of the like the amount of like they're talking about the garments, right? So if they're the seller of purple, they don't sell purple dye, they sell purple clothes. That's what they sell. And obviously purple was like a rare color, but like you have it for all different things. So you sell different colors of different fabrics.
Just say long sleeve.
Yeah, and so that's part of it, is that there are different people who kind of translate that. slightly differently, but it seems to be that it has something to do with whether it's colors or whether it's the long sleeveness. It has something to do with authority, probably. Okay.
Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Or are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words.
Okay, so this first dream here, so one of the things that I wanted to mention, because I'm mentioning it as kind of in relationship to the entirety of the story, there are no theophanies in this story. So a theophany is like where God shows up and like says, like talks to people, right? Joseph has a dream whenever he sees this. He doesn't seem to see God in it. It's not like God tell him, but that a lot of that implication is implied underneath there. So you'll sometimes get, and so that's part of it's elements like that where people think that that people notice about how this section is structurally different than a lot of the sections that came before it. Also, to me, one of the things that's interesting, and I'll probably re-mention this after we read the next dream, is trying to decipher what is the initial giving of the dreams to Joseph. What is the purpose of them, and to just think about that. All right, we'll read the next one too.
Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind.
Okay. So both dreams, the problem that they have with them is that it seems to put Joseph above them, right? And I want to mention this because I think, especially whatever we talk about next week, the chapter next week seems to come out of nowhere. But I think the thematic elements that kind of tie this chapter with the next chapter together is we are now getting into the question, right? So we started with the seed of Abraham and promised to be a nation, promised to be great, and all this stuff. We're now at the point where, okay, we're kind of starting to see it, starting to come, like, you have 12 sons. That's a good haul of kids, right? Way more than just like the couple that like the previous two patriarchs had, right? So you now have more of an issue about, so you've kind of always had an issue about who's the covenant going to go to, but it was always one or the other, right? It wasn't split. You now have the issue where who is kind of in charge? Who's really gonna be like the one that's like, is the covenant just going to be for one of them, or is it going to be split up between all of them? And like, how is that dynamic going to work?
Especially because their dad wasn't firstborn and his dad wasn't firstborn.
Exactly. And so you have a bunch of questions here, and we've already had this instance of Reuben kind of screwing up prior to this, right? We already have that, and he is the firstborn. And so, and also remember that the implied reader of this text are the Israelites like on their way back into the land? And so that's what they're thinking too. And so this is an encapsulation of also the problems that they're dealing with at that time of being like, okay, who should really be in charge here? And kind of the answer to the ultimate question, it's God. And like you're not really supposed to be worried about that too much. And thematically, this should be very similar to what happens with the disciples and Jesus, right? Jesus has the 12 disciples. What do the disciples end up arguing about? Which one's the best one? Who's going to be in charge? Whereas if you look at what the actual dreams are, right? So the first one, it's one sheaf bowing down to all of the other sheaves. So like what they all are, the ontology of all of them, they're all the same. But there's going to be some connection between this scene, right? It's a prophetic. We know this because we read the story. It's a prophetic scene of they're going to do that action in order to get sheaves, right? In order to get food, right? And so it's actually a good thing. It's a good thing that they're all in that position, right? And so God's actually kind of giving them a picture of their salvation ahead of time, and they interpret it as a thing that they should be upset about just because of this difference in power, right? And then that's actually the same thing that the next one is, because the next one, how does he refer to them? The sun, moon, and the stars. What did the covenant say that they were going to become? They were going to become like stars. In the ancient Israelite context of what stars were like gods. And so by having a prophetic dream of being like, we're all going to become stars, which is like joining like the overall thematic thing of joining divine council with God, ruling, co-rulers, co-heirs with Christ, right? That's what the whole like thing is. That's what we're supposed to be going for. And they're fixated on, wait, you're going to be ahead of us? And it's like, you missed it. You missed the point. The point of that was that we're all going to be elevated, and you fixated on the fact that someone's going to be a little bit higher than you. But that and that vision, that honestly, that it's a good vision for all of the people involved. It's good for Joseph and it's good for his family. They fixate on the tiny aspect of it that they don't really like, and it causes them to sin. And so, like, to me, that causality chain there, right? So if we're doing like if we're watching Tenet or like a time thing, right? Like it's a time paradox thing, right? Like, well, if maybe God had never shown Joseph this thing, maybe Joseph wouldn't have said anything, and then maybe they wouldn't have sold him into slavery, and then maybe he wouldn't have been able to bring them up out of Israel. And so, like, but God knows what he's doing, and God's in control. And so maybe God was like, I'm going to use a loudmouth punked kid that won't keep his mouth shut in order to get these other people that get angry about things, in order to get them all into the right position where I can then bring them out and be their salvation and then bring them into other stuff. Like, he's going like, and again, it's not condoning those things and saying they're good, but it's like God's going to use those things. Okay. All right. I don't think I'll stop it as much.
Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers past?"
I said I wouldn't stop it more. Okay. Just pointing out the subtle name change between Jacob and Israel here. And that's going to happen a lot. And scholars will point that out to try and indicate potentially different authors.
I would just say it's like it's a different act in the.
But other people will say like it's a different act in the book, or that it's there's some other idea that they're trying to get across with this. So I tend to think of it like that there's probably some other subtle idea trying to get across with the change between from Jacob to Israel. And I partially think that that change is actually indicated by the line, and his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. That's a level of maturity that Jacob has that his sons do not. And so I think there's supposed to be a bit of a change there of showing there's a level of maturity that he, whenever, like, it's almost like whenever Jacob is acting properly and doing things right, it kind of refers to him as Israel. And then whenever he's like not so much doing things properly, kind of Jacob. So that's kind of the way that I tend to think about it. There's also the connection to Shechem, which is where the one story happened with Dinah and all them, where they killed the village. Yeah. All right.
Well, just dudes, anyways.
Yes.
Didn't they say that they killed the
I don't think it was. I think it was just the men.
I'm probably confusing with somebody.
Capturing the flock at Shechem. Come, I will send you to them. And he said to him, Here I am. So he said to him, Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a man found him wandering in the fields, and the man asked him, What are you seeking? I am seeking my brothers, he said. Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock. And the man said, They have gone away, for I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from afar, and before he
So the distance between Hebron and Shechem is like, I don't know what the conversion is, but it's like 80 kilometers. So like it's pretty far. And then it's another like 10 to 15 miles to Dothan. So 17-year-old Joseph is going like a long way here. And so like he obviously couldn't have done it in a single day, which kind of makes me think that he probably had people with him. And I'm just not sure about that, but it, like, the story presents it as though it's real casual and everything, that like, oh yeah, he went and did this. But like that's a long journey. And so
It doesn't seem obvious he used like an animal or something.
no, we get
Seems
no
more
indication of
likely
that.
he would've-
Also, it's kind of weird about what this whole point is with the man that redirects him to Dothan, because it's just a dude. It's not an angel. Like every single time it's been like there's a man. You prior to this, you're like, oh, that's actually an angel. But like this one is just
Yeah,
no.
that's-
This is just a guy.
Plus, it's like 15 miles away. Why does he know that they're there?
Yeah, and also,
Did he see him go and then just say, I'm going to sit here in this field for a while? And then,
but also like, why include it? Just be like, Joseph went there. They weren't there. He got redirected to Dothan. Why do we need this whole conversation? Like, I don't know, but like you have it there, and that's actually one of like the elements that people point out to be like, this is a more like narrative plot, and there's a lot more like talking and stuff going on, and it seems to be like, okay, what is this trying to indicate? Well, I guess it's trying to indicate that Joseph is really looking for his brothers and trying to look out for them. But it doesn't really add that much to the story.
They just need more time.
Exactly. They're just padding for time right now.
came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams. But when Reuben heard it,
Okay. I will pause there. Man, I even lied. I'm gonna be pausing a bunch. I really like the the Here Comes This Dreamer.
I was gonna comment on that.
So in the Hebrew,
Master.
it does not mean master. It means master dreamer. So if you see like it has like the two like kind of words there.
Oh, that's what that means in the Step Bible.
Yeah.
Oh, I
So yeah, so like you add like both of them together, and so it's so it's like let me bring up so it's Baal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so you actually you don't really pronounce the K. If I hadn't, for some reason I got rid of it. Or I thought it was up here. Well, hold on. Yeah, the K is like the phlegmy part. But it's where'd it go? Yeah, but anyways, the reason why I think that that's cool is because like Baal and then like an epithet of like something else is Holom, yeah. Baal Holom or whatever. That's the way that you refer to like like Canaanite gods. So like there's other Canaanite gods that are like Baal Peor, Baal Hanan, Baal Perazim, Baal Zebub, that where you get Beelzebub, like that's like all of those are like, and so all of those mean like the Lord of something or whatever. And so it's another way of so like they call him like the Lord of Dreams or like the Master of Dreams, and but it's also like another way of saying like the God of Dreams. And so they're really like giving him this high honor to really take the piss out of him, I guess. It's like yes, yeah, it's a real thick version of sarcasm. But it's also kind of a reference, right? It's a reference back to whenever he said, like, I'm gonna be a star where you guys bow down to me, kind of a thing. It's like their insult references the dream itself. Also the pits are probably, so I guess in this area they would have there's like lots of limestone, and so they would cut out limestone cisterns to catch water whenever it rained. And so that's why I guess we haven't gotten to that part yet, but it's why there's a part later where it's like there's no water in it. But yeah, so that's what the pits are. They're water cisterns.
Rescued him out of their hands, saying, "Well, let us not take his life." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it.
Okay, so I think one of the interesting things about this part with Reuben is where you have this line of that he may rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father. You have the narrator like applying a level of motivation to Reuben that a lot of times we don't see that in a lot of the earlier stories in Genesis.
The writer really would have no way of knowing.
They wouldn't, but that was one of the things that I talked about a lot, about how I was like, Genesis is really descriptive and not prescriptive. It didn't tell us a lot, like whether or not what the person was doing was right or wrong. And so there was a lot of me being like, we can infer that maybe this is right, we can infer that maybe it's wrong, but we're not really sure. And there's even ways that you could possibly infer that, okay, maybe what Reuben is doing here isn't really for Joseph's own good. Maybe he's doing it so that he can kind of get back into like being the firstborn and like all of this stuff. Maybe he's doing it for selfish motivations. But the narrator like takes this step to be like, no, he was doing this to try and like help him out, but he didn't do enough to actually stop it.
Then they sat down to eat. And looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. When Reuben returned,
Okay. So, okay. So a couple of things here. One, we have Judah show up now, who Judah is also one of the sons of Leah. Also is eventually going to be the line of David. Is also the person that the story of the next chapter is about Judah. It's also interesting that he has this, "Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." So you start off Genesis with, or right after the fall, one brother murdering another brother. And then kind of towards the back end of Genesis, you're having a bunch of brothers gang up on another brother, but they don't even bother to kill him. They instead use him for their own gain and own profits. And so, in the same way, so like I said, there's this continual fall that's going on throughout throughout the stories in Genesis. And I would argue that this is probably the worst incident that like kind of occurs like in Genesis to family relationships, to really dividing them up. And it's almost to the point of, and if you remember, that whole process got kind of really got going with Lamech, whenever we had something that was given by God that was used for their own gain, used for as their own weapon, right? He turned the mark of Cain into like a weapon. And what you now have is even the sin of being the sin of killing your brother is being turned into something for your own gain. And so what you actually have here is you have the elements, and this is what I want to talk about, because ultimately what the story of Joseph is about is actually about resurrection. And I know that that's a weird idea, and we're not going to be able to fully like talk about it until we get to later chapters. But there are multiple hints of a resurrection type event taking place in the Joseph story. And it's not just with Joseph himself. It's with a couple of different characters, and we'll see that as we go through. But part of how that happens, part of how the process of resurrection takes place, is that things get so bad that they have actually kind of nowhere else to go but up. And that's what you're seeing taking place here, is like things are getting so bad between these family relationships with brothers that it's going to get turned around. And the fact that they're so evil that they didn't even bother to kill them, that they're like, oh, we can make money off of this now. That's actually going to be the thing that saves them and redeems them and makes everything better. And you can actually, like, I don't know how political I want to get right now. You can make an argument that that's actually what happens in the real world too, with a lot of different things, right? Like, yeah, like there will be so many destructive things that take place in a society that, well, what happens? The society collapses. But what happens after that? Well, the people that weren't involved in all of that junk, whatever it was, they come back up out of it, which we've seen smaller, like that's the Noah story. That's the Abraham story. Like you have little smaller instances of that. But that's also what you have happening here. And that's ultimately what resurrection is too, right? Like things get so bad, but there's a way in which reality is structured that it flips back around. And ultimately it's God that does that flipping back around, but it flips back around and becomes like okay again. And as Christians, that's the thing that like we're supposed to be remembering. But okay.
To the pit and saw.
Oh, also just wanted to make the connection between the Ishmaelites here, and that pretty much everybody is baffled about why they tie the Ishmaelites and the Midianites. Like they refer to them as Ishmaelites. Like then Ishmaelites trader passed by, they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. People are like, how do we read that? And there's like a conflation between, like, it's like, so are the Ishmaelites and the Midianites, are they two different groups? And they sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites, but then the Ishmaelites immediately sold him to the Midianites, who pulled them up out of the thing. And like it's the whole thing is weird. But then most people think that, oh, they should just be referring to the same group, because there's actually some verses later on in like Judges where it seems to conflate Ishmaelites and Midianites together and think of them as the same group. Which seems weird to me. I'm not 100% certain why they're doing it, because Ishmaelites are supposed to be like their relatives, and Midianites are actually like a whole nother line. And so maybe there's some kind of like intermingling between like the Ishmaelite and the Midianite lines to where they can like refer to them interchangeably, even though in the genealogies that we've gotten so far, they seem to come from distinct groups. But there you go. Oh, and people usually make the connection between the 20 shekels of silver that between the 30 or whatever that's given to Jesus. Inflation, yeah.
It's the same.
Apparently, the 20 shekels were like a common value for a slave. It was roughly 2 years of wages. And I guess the same price is given in like the Code of Hammurabi for the price of a slave. I was like, oh, okay.
It's
See?
kind of
You would've been after
interesting
this,
that
What is this?
Hammurabi, yes, I think is after this. But here we go.
But Joseph was not in the pit. He tore his clothes and returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone, and where shall I go?" Then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in the blood. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, "This we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not." And he identified it and said, "It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "No, I shall go down to Sheol, my son, mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard.
Okay. So you now have kind of the most, I guess, perverse, right? We've seen continually throughout Genesis this hidden identity problem constantly. It was like, we're going to hide our identity to the rest of the world, but we're going to do that for gain, and it seems to work for kind of a while, but then it starts being put back onto the covenant line itself, where people keep where right with Jacob and Esau, where Jacob plays Isaac in order to take the birthright. Then he has that thrown back at him with the whole Leah and Rachel situation. And now it's thrown back at him again in kind of an even worse situation of with like the body of his son with the non-body, right? Like, so even like just nothingness. And just being like, is this is this your son? Is this your son's robe? And like, yes. So it's kind of like that, coupled with what I said earlier, is kind of the thing that I'm like, okay, in my head, it makes sense thematically why this is sort of the quote unquote worst things that people within a family have done to each other in Genesis. But then you also have this really interesting line about, no, I shall go down to Sheol with my son mourning. This is kind of the, I don't know if there's an earlier reference. I don't remember an earlier reference to Sheol in Genesis. I should have looked that up beforehand. But I think it's really interesting to show that early kind of understanding of afterlife, but that strong connection and that strong grieving, and kind of him implying that he, by saying, no, I shall go down to Sheol, kind of indicating that he's thinking that he's going to mourn for like the rest of his life. Not just that like that's what he's going to do, but that he's going to keep doing that. And also, I thought the line about all his sons and all his daughters is also interesting, just to point out the idea of that they didn't record the number of daughters. We only know one of Jacob's daughters, right? And we talked about earlier, probably the reason why we know her is because she shows up in that one story. But here the daughters are plural, so the idea is he probably has multiple. Did I think I hit all the points that I wanted to make. Yeah. So did anybody have any further comments, questions, or things that they wanted to point out?
I think it's interesting that when Reuben went to go back to his brothers and they didn't answer his question, and then it was just left at that.
Yeah. Yeah, and you see that a lot with the like mourning and stuff. And like, to me, it seems like those questions are supposed to be there. Like, it's those sorts of things that are there for like the reader to, it's like, okay, it's not there meant to actually do something in the story. It's meant to do something in like the person that's reading it. And give them like something to connect to. For people that find themselves in similar situations, like Reuben, right? Obviously Reuben's a guy that's like in this particular story, he's someone that he's like, okay, I tried to do the right thing, but I failed. And so like, what can I do now? And the answer is not much. And he ended up choosing to go along with everybody else. But it's pretty obvious that that's not the right answer. And you have this a lot with different like stories in the Bible about being like, okay, if I was there, what would I have done? How would I have done things differently? What would have been the right thing to do? And that's also, to me, in my mind, also kind of the point of, again, if you think about how Genesis itself, right, it's a long narrative, is situated within the rest of the Torah, within the rest of the books that Moses gives. Genesis is kind of setting up all of the problems, right? It's setting up all of the like real human questions and real human problems that people face. It's supposed to be answered by the rest of the Torah, right? The law is kind of supposed to be a lot of the answer to a lot of these questions that are coming up here. It's like, okay, so what should Reuben have done? Reuben shouldn't have lied, right? Reuben should have called out his brothers. Reuben should have stepped forth as the firstborn and been like, hey, this is the wrong thing to do. We need to like all of these different things. How do we know that? We know that because of the morality that has come to us by way of Christ, but he got it by way of like Torah, right? And that's how the original readers would have been reading it too. It's like, okay, how do we answer a lot of these like human problems and these human conditions that we're in? By reading the rest of the Torah. That's how you answer it.
I'd say Reuben was smart because
Yeah.
snitches get stitches.
Snitches.
We saw what happened to Joseph.
That's
after he
true.
snitched.
I mean, that's
Nine
true.
guys.
And yeah, that's true. And like you
Sold off for 20 shekels.
yeah.
Silver.
It says
There
it's
you go,
8
whatever.
ounces. That's like not even that much.
they could have gotten more.
Nowadays, you gotta accommodate for inflation.
It could have been worse.
Yeah, we're talking like
And there's a
3,000
scarce
years of
supply of
inflation.
silver. So
I mean,
It
that's probably a
doesn't.
couple
I don't think that's the way it
$1,000
works
nowadays.
for
It's
like
So
raw
good. That's how it
materials.
works.
probably like a couple $1,000 nowadays.
Yeah, remember, this is pre-Benson.
3 minutes before you.
they basically
That's an entirely different material.
Hey, you telling me Benson didn't own any silver, just gold?
Yes.
How many goats can 20 shekels buy? I feel like that's
Let's ask Kyle's old
Coworker.
Oh, the camel guy?
I mean, you gotta ask.
Well,
the only person that probably has his number is like Rachel.
How much
dad.
did he pay on the camel?
It's like 20,000.
Okay, so 20,000 for
Oh, so this was
camel.
when you were
So
with-
how much do you
with-
think it is?
Yeah. This is when I was at Outbound.
So maybe Rachel maybe has heard of this guy.
I don't think he wasn't there long. He was there maybe a couple months before me, and he quit a couple months after me.
Too Western.
So, well, no, he got in trouble with the law.
Yeah, because it was too Western.
Oh yeah, probably yeah. I'm not used to these
We kept
law
trying to bribe-
things.
we kept trying to bribe cops.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Respect. Oh yeah.
that
Yeah,
was
This
why.
is too Western for me. I can't run.
yeah, exactly.
I wasn't bribing them. I was offering them money.
I'm gonna stop the recording.